really appreciate the fact that Lieutenant Webster has been with us for so long. And again, she's been our one constant. We have Sergeant Nathaniel Waldie with us as well from HPD. Sergeant Waldie was an investigator with the Domestic Violence Unit at HPD for a lot of years. He left us after he promoted and then he has come back as a sergeant. So we're very excited to have him. We also have Sergeant Chris Carroll from the Harris County Sheriff's Office, who is a recent person that has come over and is now the sergeant over the Victim Services Unit at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. So we're very glad to have him with us as well. We're going to start with Lieutenant Webster and Sergeant Waldie on their presentation, and then we'll hear from Sergeant Carroll. So here we go. And also just a little thing to remember, that we are recording this conversation. If you do not want to be on camera, please turn your camera off and also turn your name off as well. But we will be recording this, so we will post it on our website for other people that would like to participate or to see what we're talking about. So I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Webster and to Sergeant Waldie.
Thanks, Amy. I wanted to thank everybody for taking a minute out of your time and being aware of what goes on in domestic violence with the City of Houston Police Department. I want to discuss with you the statistics of domestic violence, and then I'm going to go into what happens when you call 911, and Sergeant Waldie will go into when the police officers arrive at your scene and the follow-up of the investigation through the charges. I wanted to tell you our mission statement for the Family Violence Unit. It's to work towards ending family violence in our community. To accomplish that, we have a threefold approach to train the police officers, educate the public, and investigate the crime of domestic violence. Now we're on the next page, domestic violence incidents.
Thank you.
Okay, there it is. Okay, I wanted to go over something very important. Harris County is the largest county in Texas with a population of 4.6 million, and we have a growth rate of 13.7%. Within that, City of Houston, we're in Harris County, we're the largest city, and we have 2.3 million residents. And Houston Police Department has approximately 5,300 officers and 1,200 civilians, and we're the fourth largest police department in the United States. The way this is our City of Houston district and beats. We work by geographical area, and so within the HPD we divide the city into 120 beats. And so if you look at the picture, that's what it's showing. And from that 120 beats, we have 17 to 18 divisions, and we have 25 storefronts. And then within that, we have 4 locations where you could report your domestic violence. We have it Southeast, we have it at Travis, we have it at North, and then we have it at Westside Command. So from that, if you look at our chart here, the top beat for domestic violence is 22 Boy 20.
Thank you.
And then it's 14 Dan 20, and then 17 E40's beat. So I hope that shows what a big area that we cover. And the thing about domestic violence, we'll go to the next page.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. I wanted to go over how the Houston Police Department, we are trying to develop our officers with training in domestic violence. And we've been working on this as developing in 2016 to 2017. We did the making sense of the victim's behavior, the neurobiology of trauma. And then also, that was our trauma-informed response. Prior to that, most investigative police departments, they used the READ technique, which was more towards the suspect of a who, what, where, when, and why. And we're really more trying to be trauma-informed so we could understand the responses of the victim and be more responsive to be able to assist the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And then we went in with Harris County DA's office, and we are focusing on strangulation. And the reason for strangulation is because you can lose consciousness in 5 to 10 seconds, and you can have death within minutes. And so strangulation is the biggest predictor of a future murder. And so we wanted to focus on strangulation so that way we could try to prevent the murder. If you've been strangled by your intimate partner, you have a 750% increase at possibly being murdered.
I was on the wrong slide.
So we went with our training and policy, and we enhanced our supervisor response to the scene. And in 2018, 2019, we did a focus on domestic violence, evidence-based investigations, and then we also focused on our strangulation forms, and so also we focused on the transgender hate crimes as a training, because there was misgender reporting and hate crime bias. Okay, so Amy, I'm on the 5-year I'm on the 5-year domestic violence incident screen.
All right. Okay.
I'm sorry, we're working on this. Okay, so here we see for 5 years, right now from January 1st to July 31st, we're at 19,054 domestic violence reports. These are reports that were reported to the Houston Police Department. We all know that domestic violence is underreported, possibly not reported at all, but currently we're at 19,000, and our average, our normal is 30,000 cases a year. These are police reports. And of the reported crimes, domestic violence accounts for 9% of all reported crimes. Okay, next screen.
Thank you.
During the COVID time, COVID-19, we were concerned about the victim or being in the home with the abuser. And so starting March 17th was our stay home, work safe order. And it, then June 10th is when it officially had been lifted. And so these are the numbers very specifically. And so I want to explain the numbers so that you can understand during COVID-19 time how it affected domestic violence. The first screen you see, it's from left to right, the total number of domestic violence from the COVID time alone, May 17th through June 10th. The Houston Police Department received 8,142 police reports of domestic violence. Within the time frame, we had the Part 1 violent crimes had increased by 36%. So the Part 1 violent crimes for domestic violence would be a family violence, aggravated assault, deadly weapon. It could be a family violence, aggravated assault, impeding breath, or it could be a family violence, serious bodily injury. So that increase, it's definitely been more dangerous for the domestic violence victim survivor during the COVID-19 timeframe. The next thing that we show an increase, the Part 2 crimes kind of went down a little bit. As you see, our crime remained the same, it just became more violent. And so then here we have showing us the domestic violence charges filed. We filed 1,603 charges of domestic violence. It's 8.3% increase. Our felony charges increased by 25% during that time frame. During this time frame of COVID-19, we had the Mayor's Violent Crime Initiative, and so we were working some extra cases. And then next slide.
Okay.
During the COVID-19 time frame, we had some, and this happened across the United States for some reason. We look at the means of how the crimes are being conducted, and we had 120% increase in the hands, fists, and feet. Our strangulations were within that. That's quite an increase for domestic violence, and it is a higher danger indicator. Our knives and cuttings were only up by 1.5%, and our firearms were increased at 25% during COVID-19. Next page. Just to go on that one thing, when a gun is involved in domestic violence, the victim is 5 times more likely to be killed. All right. During a pandemic, a natural disaster, we're all aware that victims of domestic violence are in a situation in a normal time frame, but we have to make sure that our services proceed as during COVID-19 time. We had the work home stay safe order that enacted, and so what we did to be able to know how our services were going to proceed, with some people being essential, some people not, the worry of the COVID, we began weekly Zoom meetings, which we've never done before. We did it exactly for the COVID timeframe. And we did it with the Harris County District Attorney's Office. We did it with the Harris County Coordinating Council. We did it with the Sheriff Department in Pasadena. So each week we were trying to see how the court cases were going through, if charges were still working, if our protective order courts were open. We were seeing if there was housing issues, whatever issues that we could try to work together as a community response. And so within that, Barbie Bashirs was also working with the city, and so our groups kind of joined together. From our meetings, we were watching the crime each week to see if it would go up or down, or what we needed to do to address it. And from that meeting, we did produce some posters. And so we'll go to the next page, Amy. This part here I'm going to go over first because, as I said, Barbie Bashirs was in a whole different group with the mayor's office, and I wanted to say that, let's see, Manil Patel Davis, who's with the Office of Human Trafficking for the mayor's office, and Councilmember Abby Kamen, they launched a citywide domestic violence awareness initiative, which allowed for us to help some of the concerns that we had for victims of domestic violence. We had where it assisted with some of their housing, or it assisted with some of their flexible spending. It may had helped with hotels, because we were having issues at any given time. In the city of Houston and the surrounding area, we only have 600 beds for shelter. And although we know shelter is not always needed, we wanted to make sure that we would be able to meet the demand. So with that, we were trying to get the message out of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and that services were still available by the police department, with the Houston Area Women's Center, ABDA, so it was really a coordinated response. And so I wanted to bring this up. They had a No COVID Abuse web page put together for us, and they were also doing social media to try to get the word out. What we were concerned with is the victims of domestic violence were with the abuser, unable necessarily to be out in the grocery stores, or the very limited time outside of the home. Next page. From that, we had made this poster together, and the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, they had paid for the printing of 2,000, we ended up putting 2,500 of these posters out, and we did it in physical hard copy, and we also did it in the social media. And so during the June, July months, we, in conjunction with working the investigative cases, we went out to the apartment complexes that had the highest number of domestic violence, and met with the apartment managers, and we were asking them if they would display and or put it on their social media, so that the victims could have a safety plan in place, and have the information about the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And at the same time, when we were talking to the leasing person, we handed out our blue card, which has information about all the shelters, safety plans and things like that. During this initiative, the South Gessner Patrol did an extra effort, and they tried to hit all the apartments that they have in the 17 district area, which is tremendous. And so within the whole city of Houston, we had 2,000 posters go out. This was through our initiative. The other initiative with the mayor's office, they had a different safety flyer go out through the food bank sponsored by HEB. Next. This is just us out there at the grocery stores. We're at the apartments, and we were very well received by the apartment management and anyone who would help us to post them in the areas that we thought the victim may be isolated due to the COVID time frame. So next page. Oh, I meant to mention that was Amy Smith with the Coordinating Council bringing us our posters during the COVID time frame. And I wanted to, on this slide, to talk to you about that. Prior to talking about 911, I wanted to tell you about 311. Within the city of Houston, if you dial 311 or 713-837-0311, you're able to report if the traffic lights are flashing, or you can report water leaks, or you can report something with your garbage. And they have a whole website which makes it real easy for you. Now, this is what you can expect when you call 911. The Houston Police Department is with the Greater Harris County 911 Emergency Network. And HPD and that line receives 1 million 911 calls a year and 3,000 911 calls a day. And so when you call 911, what you're going to expect is they're going to try to find out if you have a police, a fire, or an ambulance emergency. And if you're having a 911 emergency, obviously you'll dial 911. They also have where you can text 911 now. They always want voice if possible, but you may be in a situation in domestic violence where you need to do the text. If you're doing the text, the important thing to do is send in the exact address of where you are, and if you're in an apartment, to put the apartment number as well. If you'd like to create a profile of your home for 911, you just go to www.911.org, and they'll take in information of whatever information they may think is important, the names. You can have up to 10 names and information provided. Most people call from cellular phones, and so when you call 911, they're going to ask you, what is your emergency? They're going to ask you your phone number, and they're going to ask you suspects, vehicle descriptions, if weapons are involved. The main thing when you're dialing 911 is to remain calm. If there's any instructions given, such as to do first aid or something like that, stay on the line. The reason they take your phone number is in case you're on a cellular phone, which most of the phone calls are through your cellular phone to 911. And if the call is lost and they need to call you back, that's why they're asking you that. The information on the side is talking about our blue card, and those are how, once you dial 911, if it's a domestic violence call, it's going to be a code 1 call. And so the code 1 calls are when there's a threat to life or bodily injury. If that's the call that you're having, the police response is usually 4 to 6 minutes, but you could be on the line with the 911 dispatcher and they're en route. But so know that once you're starting the call, to stay on the line and the police are coming. 86% of the calls are by the cell phones, and so if you can make that account, that would help them. If you have a request for police assistance that's not a 911, we have the number 713-884-3131. I'm going to turn this over to Sergeant Waldie to go over what happens once the police arrive.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go over some of the stuff. I'm just kind of reiterate some of the things that she just said, just to understand. We kind of concentrate on different things whenever we do these speeches. Last time when I talked about it, I was concentrating on how to do the pictures. This time around, I think it's more of the 911. We want to make sure we reiterate that there's times to call 911. There's times to call the non-emergency line. There's times when you maybe shouldn't make the phone call. Maybe it's something that needs to be more secretive, where a text message would work and suffice to get police there. So it's very important to know all these different options. Lieutenant Webster mentioned about the pre-registration. That's a very important thing that's new. You can go on www.911.org, and it has an easy way to register that. So definitely want to reiterate that. What I do want to say about when you make a 911 call was that you have to understand what you want. Like she said, when you call, is it a medical emergency? Is it a police emergency? Do you need fire? You have to be able to reiterate what you want and where to go. They're going to ask you cross-street information. They're going to ask you a description of the offender that's harming you. And since this is a family violence topic, if you are in danger of being hurt, I think there's a time when you need to think if, which is a problem we have with a lot of our cases. Do you warn the offender that you're going to make this police phone call, or do you do it, or do you do something more tactical in nature, where you have something where, like a code word, you could say to a family member, a friend, a child that's in the house that's there, something like I say, like this thing is going bananas. The bananas could be your code word, or this is becoming like Armageddon. This is getting crazy. When they hear that, they say, oh, mom wants me to call 911. Let me call 911. That might be another option. I always think this is a practical lesson, not just informative. We need to know about when's the right time to call 911. Like she mentioned, the 311s for information, but we also have the non-emergency line. If you just want information, you want to make a report, it's more delayed in nature, 713-884-3131. That was on the last slide that we had. You can call that number and they can get a report done. Going back into the descriptions that you need to give to the call taker, important to know descriptions so that when the officers arrive, they know who's going to be on scene. That pre-registration ability on the 911 website is very helpful because it lets them know who might be in the house. If you have children, you can actually register them and put their information on there. If there's any medical concerns, that can also be placed there. If someone has mental health issues, you might have someone who's autistic or someone who has dementia. If the officer gets there and they see someone like that, and they might be irate or manic or an other situation, if the officers don't know that, they might think, oh my God, this is the suspect. This is who they're dealing with. And the information is very critical for these officers to respond properly. Information that can be found directly on that 911 website. I saw things like when you pre-register, you can mention the primary language spoken. That's also going to be mentioned to the call taker though. Do people require a wheelchair, cane, walker? Is there anybody who's going to be, maybe immobile? Officers might need to be aware of. Alzheimer's, dementia, like I mentioned before, deaf, hard, and hearing. If we know that in advance, we know to be able to respond with somebody who might be able to speak to the hearing impaired, like a sign language interpreter of sort. Are there service animals? Are there violent animals? People train their dogs these days. Some of these dogs are violent in nature to protect their owners. So these are important things to know. When it is not safe to talk, like we mentioned, text 911 is the perfect thing to do. So if people know about that, they can do that. Many kids these days, texting is the way to go. And if you just tell them, hey, you text 911, it's a beautiful thing for them to learn, a lot easier. And then when they text the people, all they need to do is put the location they need to go. If they need police, and they just send that message as quick as possible. Where they're going, police, fire, medical, they send it. And from there, messages will be sent by the actual call taker who will be answering those texts. So I love that they incorporated that into the 911 system. As far as the response by officers, like we said about code 1 and everything, there's a certain response time that officers have, but there's also many other factors. I mean, we obviously know, we talk about manpower shortages in different areas. We might have less manpower than other times. There, like a night shift, maybe there's not as many officers, maybe many more officers are 2-man or riding single, we don't know. Traffic is obviously going to be an issue on evening shift timeframes. So we have to account that too, but we'll always do the best we can to respond to emergency. As long as it's been displayed and explained that this is an emergency, officers will arrive based on what is told to the call taker. The severity of crime is also going to be a factor. How dangerous is the situation? How do the officers respond? Should they wait for backup? Should they arrive silent? What are the things that are factored into that? Officers are on staggered shifts, so as far as response, it's never an issue. 24-hour service, officers will respond at all times of day. So I hope no one ever thinks that, no, I'm never going to get a response. So like I said, going back, the call slip will tell the officers what they're responding to. Hopefully the information that is given is very just succinct and just has everything that the officer can use the best of their ability to respond to the scenes that they're going to. When the officer goes there, he or she is going to go and make the scene safe. Once the scene is safe, when I mean safe, I should say by separating parties, detaining individuals that might be dangerous. If they see a perceived threat, they're going to make that threat go away by either detaining them, separating parties, taking weapons away if they see something like that. That's the first thing and the most critical thing for the officer to do on that scene. Once that environment's made safe, they're going to also address whether if the medical is needed, do we need an ambulance? Do we need the fire department to come over there and evaluate some injuries? They're going to possibly get somebody treated before even being able to get the most of the information. Well, safety, and then the actual making sure that people don't get injured even worse on scene is always going to be the first thing that's going to be dealt with. Officers have body cameras. This is all meant for transparency. So when the officer arrives, everything's going to be recorded when we get there. We're going to be able to see things as we go. Going into the scene, and then once we get both parties separated, or if there's more people involved, witnesses or people that were called, sometimes people call family members prior to calling the police. If we can make contact with those people too, we're going to want to speak to them too. But all the information is going to get gathered. If there's any physical evidence there, if there's, let's say it was a shooting, bullet casings, any kind of blood evidence, if that comes down to it, there's some pretty gruesome scenes that can happen, and the officers have to make sure that that scene is going to be not jeopardized in any way. But if there is a person who has injuries, photos are going to need to be taken. There's a lot of things that have to get factored into each scene, and the officers have been trained thoroughly to respond to each one to the best of their ability, to be able to get everything that's needed to get an investigation completed to all the way up to the court system if it comes to that. There's potential for forms to be filled out when the officers are on scene. It's very critical for the actual complainants, the victims, to be calm, patient, understanding. I know in a very distressful scene, it can be a hard thing to do. Hopefully have a very understanding officer come and speak about all the resources available at that time. We have the blue form, which I have. Here's the blue form. She had a little piece of it where it showed the victim stuff, but there's information on there. The officers will provide that, and it's going to have all the resources available to a victim. It's going to also have the case number that's going to be referenced later on when an investigator gets involved if there's not an arrest made on the scene. Photos will also be taken when on scene. We usually have a print unit is what we call it, or some of these officers are very hard charging. They know how to do pretty much a little bit of everything. So they'll go get a camera and they'll take photos on scene. Anything that's in private in nature, we can always get a same-sex police officer to facilitate those pictures if it's necessary, where the injuries are places where, let's say a female has an injury, a male should not be looking at. So we'll make it as comfortable for the victim as possible. And those photos will be obviously very useful for future investigation or prosecution. If necessary, if somebody has to go to the hospital, a forensic exam can also be requested through a nurse at most facilities, medical facilities. If they offer it, we can try to do that so it can be a very more explanative type of report showing what kind of injuries, what this has done to the individual, and the photos that would be included with that. All family violence calls will require a police report, no matter how small it is. It's one of our general orders. They're going to get a police report so that we can document this, because it's very important to document any kind of offense that happens that's family violence in nature. There is usually a pattern, as we see about all the other statistics we showed, that this is something that's repetitive in nature. We try to track all these. We try to get the help to all the victims as best as we can. It's very critical that we also get the assistance from the victim to follow through with this. So we're going to make contact after the fact, after all this is over, but it's a matter of having the cooperation in the long run. So hopefully some of this information will lead to some questions after all this. But going back into the blue form provides the victim detailed services available to the victim. The case incident number, like I said, is on there. Have that accessible in the future. That way, if you ever have to call the numbers that are on there, you can refer to it and your case can easily be looked up. If it actually goes to a point where there is a follow-up investigation, there's no arrest on scene, it's going to lead to either it's going to be an investigator, family violence supervisor, or a victim's advocate that's going to make contact with the victim. When they do that, they're going to have all the information in the report. They're going to make contact with the victim. They're going to explain to them the next steps, which usually involve them coming into a family violence office. If that's not a possibility, we can always facilitate meeting with the victim at a different location, like the victim's home or somewhere that they feel safe. In most instances, people who are fearful of the offender coming back to hurt them, they'll go to a family's member's home or a friend's home, and we can always meet them there. So the average case will be reviewed, and the victim will be contacted by one of those said people, the victim's advocate, the supervisor, the investigator. The victim will need to speak with the family violence investigator to initiate follow-up investigative process. When we do the follow-up, we finally meet with the person, we're going to do some more forms. It's going to be things that will help us in the long run with prosecution, with getting a probable cause to make an arrest. It'll be either a written statement that's notarized, or it'll be an audio statement or a video recorded statement, whatever the victim feels most comfortable with. Using that, we can take that for future reference when the investigator gets assigned. We'll also take more photos if the injuries are still present and they show a different time frame when the bruises change color. We want to show the actual the change as time has gone by, so we'll take more photos. Medical paperwork will be retrieved. If there was ever a time you had to go to your private practice, your own doctor, or if you went to the hospital, we can either sign a consent to release those medical records, or you can provide discharge paperwork that'll help the officer get all the information he needs from what was the injuries actually, what the extent were. Counseling services will be provided. We have victims advocates that are each family violence office, and they can speak to you and go over the resources that are available, such as actually going to a shelter, or just if you want to speak, there's a lot of hotlines you can call. It is necessary to properly identify the defendant, the suspect, the offender. So we ask for the people if they could provide as much information as possible about that offender. We can locate an actual government ID for them. If there is no government ID, if there's somebody who is an immigrant, maybe we have Facebook photo. If you have a photo that was just taken that you have a printout of, please provide that to the officer, because we're going to do the best we can to make sure we know who we're looking for, so that there's no issues of identity. An investigative case file is going to be created based on all this information we just gathered. There's going to be a criminal history check. There's going to be the updated report based on all the communication that the victim had with officers that were on the original scene, that were on the follow-up intake process. Anybody they spoke with, they're going to make supplements to that report. So we're going to have that updated information on there. We're going to have confirmation of who the actual offender was. It's going to be created into a big old packet. That's going to get handed off to a supervisor. The supervisor is going to review it. He's going to decide who actually would be best to investigate that case, and he'll hand it off. Once that investigator gets the case, got 5 days. 5 days to make contact with that victim to say, hey, this is who I am. I'm Detective Waldie. I'm going to be investigating your case. I'm going to review these things. They might have some questions. What's currently going on with you? Do you have any new issues? Is there been more threats, harassment, any more assaults? Is there new reports that I don't know of? They're also going to look for older reports. They're going to find out what related issues you've had in the past, so that we can understand the best charge to pursue when everything comes to a conclusion. Once they get better understanding what's going on with that, they're going to do their investigation. They're going to make sure they give the anybody who was there, they're going to get statements from there. If there was surveillance camera footage, they're going to locate that surveillance camera footage. They're going to go over body cam footage from the scene to make sure that everything just looks exactly how it was displayed on the report they received from the officer. There's so many different things they can do. They can retrieve the 911 phone call that was made. They can speak to people who know of the suspects, like family, friends, if they want to get some kind of understanding of their personality, if there is issues with mental health, things like that. And at some point, the recommendation is that we speak to the suspect. We have to give the suspect, the offender, a chance to relay what happened. There's two sides of the stories. There are reasons not to do that. In those exigent circumstances where we feel like the offender is the bigger threat, that they have a history of violence, that it's documented, we might pass that step up and confer with the district attorney's office and say, should we contact him, or do I feel like that by contacting the actual offender, this is actually making a bigger threat for the victim? And if that is the case, then we'll move on. But we have to justify that if we're going to move on and not talk to the actual person who is accused of the crime. Once all reasonable leads are exhausted, all pertinent evidence is retrieved, the case will be presented to a district attorney office for approval of charges. The Harris County District Attorney's Office will make the determination. In some instances, if there's other related reports where the offender has prior history or is currently in a case, we're going to have to speak to the actual district attorneys, or the actual assigned district attorney of that case, so that they can make a justification if we need another charge on the person. If charges are accepted, that assigned investigator will create a copy of the case file, provide it to the district attorney's office, and then create what we call as a probable cause statement. And the probable cause statement is going to list all the facts and the reasons behind why we believe the offender, which at that point would be the defendant, committed this crime. What our facts are, what our belief is, and based on the statements, the evidence, everything we have. We are an evidence-based investigation. This is going to be something that we're going to have to support it with something. It might just be statements, but it could be something physical, like the photos of the injuries, or other witness statements, other medical records, things like that. During that process, at some point, the investigator is going to ask the victim, do they want a magistrate's order of emergency protection, which that was gone over last week by Amy, and is a very critical thing because it also assists the officers in the event that there's future issues. If there is future issues, a magistrate's order of emergency protection will create that 61 to 91 day protective order that can help assist us make an arrest if the offender creates more issues, creates something that's threatening, harassing, or harming the victim. So it's very important if we get the victim to say, yes, I would like something like that. With the warrant, we'll tell the district attorney's office, let's go ahead and do that. When the actual defendant sees the judge at that point, the judge is going to warn him and tell him, you got a vote placed against you in protection of the victim. And they'll get warned about that, and we can start that process to prevent any further issues. So once that arrest warrant is signed off by a judge and is on file, If the offender can be located and arrested by any law enforcement officer, it doesn't have to be HPD, it could be Harris County, could be Montgomery County, whoever finds the person. Sometimes they find them on traffic, on a traffic stop. Sometimes they find them just going to court. And they say, hey, do you know you have this? Well, now we have to take you into custody. So it's very critical that we get this done as quickly as possible, which takes cooperation of all people involved. Officer can do their job properly, quickly, and get the justice that's deserved for the victim. If nobody can.
Sergeant Waldie, thank you so much. I'm gonna thank you both to Lieutenant Webster and Sergeant Waldie. I'm gonna turn it over to Sergeant Carroll from the Sheriff's Department, just to kind of give him a little, I mean, most things are the same for each agency, but Sergeant Carroll, do you have anything that's a little bit different than HPD?
The only difference that we would have is on the patrol aspect. I believe it was mentioned that the officers would refer it over to investigations. Our patrol officers, if they can file the warrant, if the suspect's gone on scene, they have the capability of doing it. I'm not sure what the HPD's capabilities are, but that's what our patrol officers are expected to do if there's probable cause to believe that there's an offense occurred.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Nathaniel, Sergeant Waldie, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you have just, we can maybe 5 more minutes and we can wrap it up, and then we can have some questions. And I think Lieutenant Webster's answering questions in the chat. So thank you, Lieutenant Webster.
Awesome.
So,
So I was pretty much done. It was only maybe 1 or 2 more sentences, but just to go off what Carroll said, our patrol officers, they don't usually run warrants. They're more concentrated on being on the streets and responding to calls. They're very busy as it is, like we talked about manpower issues. So we try not to rely on them to do that. They can, but when they do, it's almost like they're going above and beyond. They're doing something extra, which is great experience for them. It's just not expected. If they can't get the actual offender on scene, if they can't find him, they can't locate it, it's going to get passed back to us, the concerned division, and then it's expected that we take care of it. It's just a longer process. That's why we always want the patrol officer to actually handle it, but when they can't, we're going to take care of it. But then it becomes a more, like we said, a more detailed process. We're going to get more evidence. We're going to try to make this a solid, case in the future for the DA's office.
great.
But
Sergeant Carroll, do you have anything else to add about the Sheriff's Office? Or do you want to talk a little bit about the Sheriff's Office?
Yeah, well, I was just going to talk about our SMART program. In December 2019, the Sheriff's Office, Harris County Sheriff's Office, initiated the SMART program. That consists of 2 unmarked units, which these are 2 full-time investigators that are in unmarked vehicles, and they have full-time advocates that ride with them. And they're, I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my phone. So, what their jobs are basically to do is these teams are out and about in the districts. Initially, they were opened up to just one district, which is District 1 in our North District. That's our busiest district, and the hours were from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. We reevaluated that and adjusted the hours from 3 p.m. to 1 a.m. because most of the domestic violence cases happened on evening shift between the hours of 2 and 10 or 2 to midnight. And what our investigators and advocates do is when they're available, they respond to domestic violence calls after the scene is secure, and they can provide immediate support and assistance to the crime victims there. If the victim needs to get removed from the scenario, they'll transport them to a hotel or whatever to get them away. They assist patrol with collection of evidence, filing charges, and that goes forward with letting the patrolman go back in service, and our investigators will take over, and also providing assistance and help for the victim. Our and it's not just domestic violence cases, it's also sexual assault cases, robbery cases, homicides, anything with a violent nature that they'll respond to. So they, as I mentioned before, they also solicit charges with the on-call domestic violence ADA, or again, help patrol walk through the process, and they need to collect evidence for the patrol unit. They'll do it as well, but they are not considered to be first responders. They're always going to be responding after the fact, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll have 3 more to fulfill all of our districts. So we're going to try to continue to push that program. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Sergeant Carroll. We had a question, and it was, how do you handle a situation where a victim has had fear of calling the police, or fear if they call the police there's going to be further retaliation?
I know they have the ability to go to the Houston Area Women's Center, where they can speak to the individuals there, advocates there. And on Tuesdays, which I think I've taken over that role at this point, once they reopen, they actually, if you can speak to an advocate and also speak to an officer where it doesn't look like you're going to a patrol station, you can make a report there. You can just speak and talk about the situation. I think we have a lot of options. If you just want to speak to an advocate, the information can get relayed and you can find a safe way for an investigation to occur.
I'd like to touch on that. You know, we had a situation like that, very similar, just a couple of nights ago, and we had a female that was very reluctant to call law enforcement. I guess after the final time, she was tired of being assaulted, and she called 911, and we responded, and my smart units responded. The advocate was able to set up temporary shelter for her immediately, and we transported her out of county so she could be away from the suspect, and that's what we would do in that type of situation if, you know, it was presented to us and the victim was willing to cooperate with us.
And we also had another question about, like, how long does it usually take to respond to a 911 call? I mean, I know things are different depending on what area of town you live in, what district is available for each HPD or the sheriff's office. But like, I know that there was a question that it took like an hour and a half for a response from a patrol officer. Can anybody respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it. There are situations where that happens. There's no denying it. I mean, there's people who have dealt with that situation plenty of times. I try to make the reasoning behind it, like we talked about the traffic, do we have the officers, do we have the manpower, are they on different scenes? We can't answer each one specifically because I wasn't there, I don't know. The officers there, when they respond, then maybe they can detail like, hey, I'm sorry, there was a big giant accident. We had to resolve that. It took a lot of manpower and we couldn't respond to this. It might be missing information in there that we didn't have to say, hey, this is a very dangerous scene. There was guns involved. There was knives involved. Somebody's still in jeopardy at this point. And if we didn't have that information, the officers didn't know to respond quicker and make it the code 1, the immediate response. It could go so many different directions, but I do know it happens. I mean, I was there. I was an officer at one point. I've seen the calls holding, but I couldn't do anything about it. I did the best I could to answer the calls that I could, but there was always somebody that didn't get that call answered. We always refer them, if they can, to go to a police station. The police stations are there. There's someone there ready to help them at any point in time. But if it's not feasible for them to go, they have to wait for an officer. We do the best we can with the information and the manpower we have. And I apologize for anyone who had to wait for that long. It's not good. I agree. 1 hour is too long to wait.
Okay, so here's another question. A victim had to recant her statement when the officer called and asked her over the phone why the while the abuser was sitting opposite, intimidating with body language that he would kill her. Unfortunately, he has 7 unregistered guns. Why did the officer call beyond our understanding?
I think I understand what she's saying. I do know when we have people who recant, one thing, we might act like we say, oh, okay, you're recanting, that didn't happen. If we're just talking to her over the phone, that's not going to suffice. We ask anybody who does a recant to come into our office. We need to speak to you individually, or let's set up a meeting, let's talk. We want to see you face to face. We want to talk to you and get a better understanding. If you can give us any sign that you're in danger, we might actually send an officer to you right then and there and say, we just need something. You know, I've heard these many stories of people using code words to try to like, hey, are you okay? Are you safe? Are you on speakerphone? Like what's going on, to try to get an understanding of if they are being coerced to say what they are. It happens a lot. But to me, HPD wise, with the experience I have, I don't see anybody that a recant would cause a case to just shut down just from a phone call. That's not going to happen. I'm a supervisor there. I'm going to make sure it's not going to happen.
Okay, the last question that we have that we can take tonight, because we're getting close to the end of our time here, is how do you work with the victim when there isn't shelter availability? And that might not necessarily be a law enforcement response. We know that there are shelters that have had to reduce their capacity due to social distancing. There are certain shelters in the area that have received some funding to do some safe harbor programs so that they can take individuals into hotels and to keep them safe and that way. We realize and we recognize that the city of Houston and the Harris County area do not have enough shelter beds available. We are trying to do the best that we can. The coordinating council is working with our community partners trying to get as many people into shelter and or housing as appropriate. But we recognize that we know that there is not enough. As I always like to say, the city of Houston and Harris County has great social services if we were living in Terre Haute, Indiana. But we're living in the city of Houston, and that's just we don't have enough services, and so we recognize that. So I would like to thank Lieutenant Webster, Sergeant Waldie, and Sergeant Carroll for participating tonight. We really appreciate you guys. We appreciate our law enforcement partners. We know you have a really tough job, especially during these times. We thank you. We know that our partners with HPD and with the Sheriff's Office are wonderful partners. There's a lot of innovative programs that we didn't even get to touch on tonight. So we do appreciate the fact that y'all are all there. I'm just gonna follow it up. If Barbie or Thesha would like to wrap everything up or say anything, if not, we can, Barbie?
Yeah, I'll just add that, next week we will be meeting again. If there are more questions that we didn't get to, please send an email or we can leave the chat open for a few minutes so we can gather those questions and we can address them next week. We definitely want this to be information sharing. Next week, we can answer questions. There will be more information about some of the innovative programs as well. So, and then the last week of the month, we're dedicating it solely to discussion, feedback, questions and answers. So we hope that we can keep you coming back. I also want to say that, I know that in the chat, there were some folks that were sharing the struggles and challenges with getting access to services and safety. And we want you to know that, yes, that it can be very challenging. I commend those of you that are reaching out, because reaching out for help is already a challenge, just to make that step. And it takes a lot of courage and strength for you to do that. And it's hard when you're met with not a response that you wanted or needed at that time, but want to encourage, please keep reaching out. We're here as a resource for you as well. And if there's anything that we can do to make access to services better, that is definitely why we're here and why we're doing this series. And I just want to thank you. And again, to the law enforcement folks, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate you.